Coming to you from the beautiful metaverse. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And if you are joining me today, I hope that you will talk to me in the chat room, tell me what you might like to hear. Meanwhile, I'll tell you what's going on with me. And this, of course, is the first broadcast of the week, and it's our first full week with Midday with Reverend Don. And today I thought I would talk a little bit about life in general, about my puppetry, maybe a little bit more about psychic work, and whatever anyone wants to talk about. Tomorrow we'll be talking about the Corellian alphabet. If you're not familiar with the Corellian alphabet, it is a metaphysical alphabet created specifically for the Corellian tradition by me many, many years ago, um, well in excess of 40 years ago. And still evolving, still developing, undoubtedly always will. These things always do. But we'll have quite a bit to say about that tomorrow and the special Corellian font that is now available for your computer. Today, you'll notice behind me a large box. It is the replacement for an earlier box that's been there for a while and had become empty. And these are envelopes for mailings from CorellianPublishing.com. And we've been mailing lately a lot of Reverend Don's Super Omnibus in paperback form. There's also the collectible hardback still available, and the clergy version still available to the high priesthood. And so we've had a lot of these going out. We also have new offerings soon to come out. And of course, we also have things like the degree books, Reverend Don's Book of Questions, which chronicles many of the questions that were asked of me and answered during the 10 years that I did Reverend Don's vlog. And those cover every possible topic you can think of. And also Medium 365, a year-long guide to mediumship. And these and many other offerings are available at Corellian.com, including video offerings such as Lady Crystal's Tarot Reversals class and my Introduction to Tarot class. So there are lots of things at Corellian.com and Corellian coffee mugs, just lots of different things. So if you have a chance, check that out. And chances are something may end up going to you from one of these many envelopes. So for those who are following the saga of the puppets, I'm working on the Lenore puppet. I think I had talked in some detail about this the other day, but what I'm doing is a stop motion version of Edgar Allan Poe's Raven. And the Raven has only 3 characters, one of whom is the Raven, one of whom is the narrator, and the third, who in the poem is an off-page character, Lenore. And Lenore is deceased at the time of the narrative, but in the animation, she will be making an appearance. And I've been having great fun putting the Lenore puppet together. I think I may have said before, I'm using articulated fashion dolls as the basis for the puppets because the articulated body is already created. And the basis for the Lenore puppet is a Harry Potter doll. She already looks nothing like Harry Potter anymore. But as a basis for making the puppet, it removed a lot of structural work and allowed me to focus more on the aesthetics. And watch for more photos of that. Eventually there'll be a video of the making of that puppet. And I'm having great fun doing it. Soon I will be working on the set that the story will unfold in, and I should have a lot more to say about these things at that time. And I want to say hello to all of the people in the chat room. Hello to my nephew Jason, good to see you. Hello to Mary. Hello to Tom. Hello to Arlene. It's good to have you all with us. And although I've been doing Restream for a while, I've only recently started using being the person who's actually putting it out. I've been a guest on other people's programs, so I'm still getting used to it. I find it quite a nice platform, actually. I'm very pleased to be using it. And Arlene asks, how long does it take to make a stop motion movie? And that depends entirely, of course, on how long the movie is. One of the attractions of The Raven is that it's not very long. I believe at most it might be 20 minutes, but Stop motion pictures take quite a long time to make because you move the characters just a tiny fraction at a time while photographing them to move them forward. And that can be quite time consuming. And um, there we go. That can be quite time consuming. And as I was saying, I'm still getting used to the studio and did not realize I needed to do that. But that should improve the experience for everyone. Um, but as I was saying, you move them very slowly. There are certain shortcuts and a good bit. And hello, Lilith, in the Netherlands. It's good to see you. Um, a good bit of this will also be animated by hand. The facial expressions, some of the movements, I will be adding with hand animation. And if you've watched my work for any length of time, you'll have seen my hand animation. I think probably the most popular piece of hand animation I've done is the witch flying into the tree, who was an ad for Witch School many years ago, and still sometimes shows up. I've also animated things like creating a crystal web access point. I've animated many of the exercises in the degree lessons in video. And these were done by hand animation, where I would be drawing it rather than photographing a model as in stop motion animation. But there will be an aspect of that in this film as well. And that's partly because getting the facial expressions, I think, certainly would be impossible with the figures I'm using, but even if I had made them from scratch, I think that would be a rather difficult thing that can be more easily done with hand animation. And so the eye movements, the speech, and things like that will be added by hand to the photographs of the puppet. Whereas, for example, if you were to look at, I think Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer may be one of the more famous stop-motion animations from the 60s. If you notice, the expressions have been applied to the heads that did not necessarily have them built in. So you see the eyes and the mouth change, but these were they were put onto it. But with figures this small, that would be impractical at best. So there'll be an aspect of both stop motion animation and hand animation. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to do. I'm also working on the, oh, and hello, Bradley. Thank you for joining us. Bradley says, hope you're doing well. I am, thank you. Um, I am still recovering. I'll be recovering for quite a while, I'm sure, but I'm doing quite well in that context, and I'm quite happy with where I'm at overall. Um, and you know, I've been walking every day about 1.25 miles. Last night we went out to see Arsenic and Old Lace at the Alhambra here in Jacksonville, the Alhambra Theater, and it was quite delightful. It was. I like live theater. It was very nice to get to attend that. As I was saying, I'm working also with Cosmo Rubiconis on the return of Lord Don's Library of Horror. And we've been discussing a variety of films that we hope to bring you with commentary in coming months. And I'm hoping the first one will be probably around the end of April. I'm not going to tell you a lot more about that, but if you remember Lord Don's Library of Horror from the season already completed, what we do is we take an older horror film that's in the public domain and we have commentary on it, particularly on its metaphysical aspects, and also other aspects if they're relevant to our audience. Things that you might be interested in. For example, one of the films we did was Son of Ingagi, which as a horror film is definitely a B film, but you know, some of the B films are better than the A films. But the things in that movie I thought were fascinating. The role of the mad scientist who, unusually for that era, is a woman who is introduced as a negative, miserly character and then revealed to be very different in reality. And I like that kind of twist. Um, and of course, Son of Ngagi is an entirely African American film from the days when the film industry was segregated, which makes it fascinating just in that light itself. The the way I think it's a wonderful film. I highly recommend it. And Sir Jason says um, he loves my commentary. I think you think you'll find the commentary will continue to be interesting. My favorite part from Son of Ngagi is where the beautiful heroine faints into the arms of the monster, and the monster rolls his eyes and says, "What?" Um, you could miss it if you blinked, but it was so against expectation that instead of being thrilled to have the beautiful heroine faint in his arms, he is totally puzzled by the irrationality of it. We also did Dementia 13, which is quite a great film. We did several others. Some of the films I hope to do in the future include some of the early films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is from 1919, well over 100 years now. And a fascinating film. It is, of course, silent, but it is one of the most original films I think you'll see, and one of the most original endings, which was the first of its kind in cinema history. Um, and the story of how it got that ending is actually even more fascinating than the ending itself. Metropolis is another silent film we're looking at. Another fascinating film. And one of the things that's fascinating about Metropolis, and there are so many things that are fascinating about Metropolis, but the primary movers in this film, and welcome Julia in the chat room. Julia says she loved The Pit and the Pendulum, and I totally agree. Um, but one of the things about Metropolis that's interesting, it was filmed in, I believe, 1925. Um, Came out, I think, in 27. As the Nazis were coming to power in Germany, it's a German film, and each of the principal people in this film, as they obviously had to do, had some sort of interaction with the Nazis. Um, Two of them ended up fleeing Germany, and the other one remained. But their individual stories and how they had to deal with this is very interesting. And Lilith asks where she can find the other viewers as she is watching from Facebook. I think everyone is watching from Facebook or from Magick TV. You might I think that there is on Magick TV a place to see the other. Yes, it's going now, and I think that you can see the other people in the chat room there, perhaps. Um, on Facebook, we're going out to so many different platforms that in some places you can see the others, and in others not. And welcome, Octavia. It's so nice to see you. You know, one of the things I'm loving about this format, this platform, and this time of day um, is that I'm seeing so many familiar faces, but also people I wouldn't normally see because this time is so much more accessible to our people in Europe who, for example, cannot usually come to my chat room, but they can be here because it's a more reasonable hour for them. And it's so nice to see so many people joining us from Europe. Um, and you know, we're also open to other movies. We have a long list of public domain movies we're going through and looking for those things that have metaphysical commentary. Um, and also, you know, we may just go with general interest commentary as well, but the original idea was we would focus on the metaphysics. And welcome, Mike, in the chat room. And you know, if you've ever seen Metropolis, especially the shortened version that was the only one available for so long, you might say what metaphysics are in this film. And in fact, most of the metaphysics have been excised from the film, but are present in the novel. But you can still see them around the edges, and we're going to talk about what's missing. I believe when we come to that film, if you're familiar with the very famous transformation scene from Metropolis, where the character well, where the robot is transformed into the semblance of the character Maria. This is a groundbreaking special effects scene shot in an era when everything had to be done by hand. They still don't really know for certain how they did it because several people told different stories. And in fact, they may have shot it several different ways, Fritz Lang being who he was, and the kind of director who did it again and again and again. But if you watch that scene, you'll notice in the back of the room a giant pentagram pointing downward toward the robot. And if you didn't know the metaphysical background that has largely been cut from the story, you would wonder why that's there, but there's a reason it's there. And it had been a big part of the original story. And hello to Elizabeth. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And these are the kind of things we want to talk about. There was another film, I can't think of its name, but I had reviewed it with the thought of using it as one of our library of horror films. And it was set in New England. It was made in the 60s and yet somehow wound up in public domain. And it is a kind of a typical Curse of the Witch movie from the 1960s. And we might end up using it even though it has no real metaphysics in it. But to speak about how people view metaphysics who don't know anything about it, particularly at that time, and why this was a popular subject at that time. I think the most popular film of its sort was Black Sabbath, which put the witch coming back from the dead in Europe in a castle. But this was in a small town in New England, and it was very atmospheric. I think people would enjoy it, even though there's not a lot of actual metaphysics to speak to. Another thing that can be spoken to through the medium of movies are cultural assumptions that we don't always realize, biases that people absorb from film and literature and custom that they may not realize they've absorbed. And the movie I was just referring to, what was it called? Couldn't have been Town of Blood, that's too, well, yes, it could have, it was the 60s. But it has three prominent female characters. One who has, well, two who are very conventionally beautiful for the era, which means small features, blonde, Barbie-esque, for want of a better way to put it. And these are the, I guess we'd say the heroines, and then the villain has just the most beautiful, interesting face. She has strong features. She is portrayed as a strong character. And she is allowed to register her annoyance with the ageism implicit in the plot. But I think that's an important part of this movie to look at, and how in that era and still today, women who are strong and interesting are often relegated to the role of villain. And women who are put in the role of heroine are those who are going to trip while fleeing from the monster. And I find that very interesting. One of the reasons I think The Mummy is one of the best horror films ever created, and I mean the 1932 Mummy, is that it has a strong heroine, one of the few really strong heroines from that era. Not the only one, but I think the strongest one, because at no time does she rely on the men around her to save her. She saves herself in that movie with the aid of the goddess Isis. If you are a believer in Egyptian religion, this is a great movie for you, because Egyptian religion is treated absolutely seriously, not necessarily archaeologically, but absolutely seriously. and actually a lot closer to archaeologically than any other mummy movie ever made. Certainly more so than the modern mummy movies, or even those of the 40s. Um, and it's a lot like the Planet of the Apes series. If you've ever watched the Planet of the Apes series from the 60s and 70s, this is not a commentary on the modern one, which I think corrects some of the problems I'm about to mention. But if you watch that first film, it is a masterpiece. Every aspect of creating a different civilization has been addressed. Every detail, every I has been dotted, every T has been crossed. The story is um, brilliant and completely coherent internally. And that's not true for any of the sequels. The way they handled that is a bit like what Star Trek later did, to speak to some of its inconsistencies, and that is speak to the idea of the multiplicity of time. And the Planet of the Apes, actually, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, speaks very beautifully to the idea of multiple timelines, um, multiple universes in the multiverse. But one of the reasons they had to do that is that they had shot their continuity to heck in the different films, and they had to explain it. Luckily, they had a coherent explanation that ties with actual metaphysics. I don't know how many people who've watched that film caught that, but it absolutely does. But if you look at the first film and those that came after, the quality just goes continually downhill, even though they're all, in my opinion, entertaining films that had their strong points. But none was a masterpiece like the first, and the Mummy movies have been exactly the same. That first movie was a masterpiece. You do have to watch it in the context of being 1932, but even today, it's a masterpiece of a movie. No other Mummy movie ever made within that series was comparable. Now, there have been movies with a mummy theme that were not part of that series, um, but I don't know that I can think of any that was ever that good either. And precisely because in the others, they did not do the research that makes it a legitimate metaphysical film. And the 1932 Mummy actually is a legitimate metaphysical film. As a metaphysical practitioner, you can watch that film and say, well, yeah, maybe that's a little far out there, but it's not that far. And if we twist it a little bit, we can see that. And other things you'll notice are outmoded metaphysical ideas. One of the things I thought was fascinating when I caught it, and I don't know how many times I had to see that movie before I caught this. In the 19th century, there were some very dubious racist ideas in metaphysics. Um, and they show up in this movie, but only in the mouths of the European characters, not in the mouths of the Egyptian characters, which in fact go directly opposite to them. Um, Admittedly, cutting the scenes of Zita Johann undercut the story slightly in this respect because you did not see all of her incarnations. But you have the Europeans making some racist assumptions about why certain things are happening, but you can plainly see by watching the Egyptian characters that it's not what's actually going on. And I thought that was fascinatingly deep for something that's never remarked on in the film. And also the fact that the European characters, despite this, nonetheless accept the legitimacy of Egyptian religion. And when the obligatory doctor, um, Van Helsing type character, has to give an amulet to the young lady to protect her, it's an amulet of the goddess Isis. Not any, there's no Christian reference in this entire film that I can recall of. And the Dusty Dud in the chat room asks, what is metaphysics? Is it an umbrella term? And I'm kind of new to this stuff. And metaphysics is the study of, of greater physics, the study behind magic, the study of psychism. Um, it is, in a way, an umbrella term for all of these different practices, uh, because it does refer to magic, to psychism, um, in every different form you can think of, it refers to the study of incarnation and reincarnation, the nature of God, the universe, and everything. It's a very broad term in that sense. Um, and anything spiritual can come under the term metaphysical, I would say. Some people might disagree, but I would say that if it's that metaphysics is the study of spirituality in a lot of ways. It's a slightly broader term even than that, because it's the science of what we might call spirituality, how it works, why it works. Um, so they're not identical terms, but they're very much the same subjects. And I find metaphysics a good term to use because it is not as limiting as some others. Um, because there are a number of films that one, or a number of words that one could use that would not apply to the range of films we're talking about, but metaphysics does. Spirituality, several of the films we've talked about, I would not say have much to do with spirituality, although spiritual subjects are part and parcel of them. The term occult would not necessarily apply to some of these films, but it would to others. But metaphysics applies to all of them. And metaphysics can apply to films that you don't immediately realize are metaphysical also. In doing Lord Don's Library of Horror, we are obliged to restrict ourselves to public domain movies. And that means mostly older movies, but there are many interesting modern movies that I wish we could do. One of my favorites is the film called The Others with Nicole Kidder, which I think is one of the best metaphysical movies I have seen, both as a movie and as metaphysics. It's up there um, with the best of them, in my opinion. Um, would you call it spiritual? I don't know that you would. Would you call it occult? I don't think you would. But metaphysical, absolutely, because it deals with life and death and life after death. Another one that's one of my favorites is called The Adding Machine. And I don't see how you could attach maybe the word spirituality, certainly not the word occult, certainly not the word magical, but definitely metaphysical to The Adding Machine, even though on the surface it's dealing with social issues, social justice, social evolution, technology, and also death and life after death. And if you have ever seen The Adding Machine, um, oh, and I have the wrong name. How interesting. I'll have to find out how to change that. Um, but apparently I'm listed as Reverend Mary Hawk. I am not Reverend Mary Hawk. I'm Reverend Don Lewis. But Reverend Mary Hawk is a fine person, and and you can see her on Pagan World TV quite a lot. We just recently did Tarot Thursday together, which was a delight. Um, I know how to change that, but I mean we're at the end of our half hour almost now, so I won't do it today. But as I was saying, the Adding Machine has one of the best expositions on the afterlife I've ever seen. It is absolutely fascinating. It is, and from everything I have studied and experienced in my journey as a magical practitioner and psychic, it's absolutely accurate. Um, Stylized from a particular perspective, but absolutely accurate. And how it got into this movie, um, which stars um, Milo O'Shea and Phyllis Diller, um, one of Phyllis Diller's relatively few starring roles. Um, it just is, it's not a place I would have expected to find accurate metaphysics, but there it is. And this is the kind of thing that you may find me talking about. And one of the things I think that people often fail to realize, we think of metaphysics in the magical community. I think we often think of it as being kind of hidden in the shadows. People don't look at it or know it, but I don't think that's true at all. It's very much where people can see it. They just don't know what they're looking at. You know, one of the things I've been told again and again by people who've come to the Wiccan religion is they feel like they've found what they believed their whole life and just never had a word for. And that's because it's very much part of this culture and has been for a long time. If we stop playing games about exact words and look at the nature of what we're talking about, and the Dusty Duds thanks me for answering the question and remarks on having seen some of my St. Louis Pagan Festival videos and hopes to go this year. And you know, the St. Louis Pagan Picnic is one of the most enjoyable pagan festivals in the country. If you do have the chance to go, you absolutely should. It's simply a delight, and I've enjoyed going there year after year and seeing old friends and making new ones. So. Um, I highly recommend it. With that, we've come to the end of our hour. I hope you'll join me tomorrow when we'll be talking about the Corellian alphabet. And let us close with a prayer, as we are in the habit of doing. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to see all those things that are directly before us and all those things that surround us as accurately as possible. Help us to judge where we stand and where we are walking as we go forward. And we shall go forward hand in hand with you to the best of our abilities. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you, and may you be blessed now and always. And may you be blessed until next time, and we will see you then.